Hey folks, first off I just wanted to thank everyone for all the support that I've been receiving over the past few weeks. If you've been paying attention to my social media at all, you'll know that I've went through some tough times for the past couple weeks with the loss of my mother and everything like that, and I'm just now getting back, and this is actually my first video back, but I did want to just thank everyone for all the support and kind words while I was gone, and for giving me my space and my time to kind of, deal with that. But starting with this video and going forward, I should be pretty much back to regular schedule releasing these videos, as well as working on some casting for Season 7 placement tournament for the CEVO MLG Pro League, as well as prepping for some other events and stuff like that down the road, hopefully. I'm not really sure if anything else is down the road for me yet, but I hope so. So I just want to give like a quick status update, I guess you could say, right at the beginning of the video, just to let you know that hopefully I'm back for the most part, and hopefully you'll see me casting and producing videos regularly again, as I had a pretty good consistent streak going up until recent times. But in this video, what I just want to talk about is, I guess, what's kind of old news, to be honest. We've obviously had some roster changes take place within the North American scene, so I just kind of wanted to comment on those just really quick, even though I guess the news is a bit old on the timing. But it's still, relatively new, so to speak, as we haven't really seen these players play a whole lot yet, so there's definitely still something to think about and talk about, I think. So the first roster move that got announced was when Elige actually joined Liquid in place of NAF. So this was the first roster change that we heard about not too long ago. I guess it's been a couple of weeks now. First off, I will say that I already talked a decent bit about Elige as a player in one of the other State of NACSGO vlogs that I did not too long ago. I think it was part 5, if I'm not mistaken. Where I talked a bit about Elige as a player, but I'll just kind of highlight him again. I mean, this guy was relatively unknown. I mean, he's very young. He's only 17 years old, so he hasn't been really, playing the game that long, to be quite honest. So he definitely is kind of a new talent, kind of one of these up-and-coming guys that you hear people talking about. And so he got his first really big start at a professional level of Counter-Strike by playing with eLevate, last season of Invite, of ESCA, as well as, playing ClutchCon with them and some other different online tournaments and things like that. Prior to joining eLevate, he played in like some of the more amateur leagues, playing with what is now went out from the ESCA Premier Division, as well as a team that I think is either CEVO or NCEVO placement, if I'm not mistaken. So, kind of playing in a more, amateur semi-pro team, I guess you could say. And like I said, joining eLevate. Now, while he was playing with eLevate last season of ESCA and CEVO, he was statistically their best player when it came to total frags and average damage per round and things of that nature. So, showing some promise on this at the pro level at such a young age in online play, at the very least, when it came to his play. He's a very aggressive player. He's an entry fragger. He has a wicked high sensitivity. I think he has one of the highest sensitivities I've ever heard of out of any of the pro players throughout the entire globe. People may look at this kid to be kind of one of the next faces for North American Counter-Strike at such a young age, at 17, and that seems to have a pretty good fragging ability and skill set, and most importantly, he embraces the role of being an entry fragger. So I think, something that some players have commented on, I think maybe Hiko most recently, is that, and some North American, some levels of the North American community, it's really hard to find that because most people want to play for stats, and so the entry fragging role is certainly not a role where you're gonna get the crazy stats all the time. It's a high risk, high reward type situation. You're likely going to get killed a lot, and being used to allow other people to kind of come in second or third behind you and kind of clean up and mop up all the frags and stuff like that. So a lot of people, even though they claim they're entry fraggers or they want to step up to an entry fragging role, they really don't embrace it completely. But I think Elige will definitely be a guy who can do that for his team. Now, looking at his LAN play, there really isn't a whole lot to go off of. The only LAN I've actually really seen him play is ClutchCon, where his team eLevate was actually able to make it out of group play quite easily. They smashed Anal Esports 16-5 in a game. In that game, Elige dropped a 30 bomb. That was his opening game of the tournament, so that's a great way to kick off the event. You know, they did have a loss to what is now Keyed Stars in group play in a crazy overtime game on cash, but they still found a way to advance out the group. Once they got to bracket play, they played against CLG in a best of 3. There they actually had, you know, one of the bigger upsets of the tournament and one of the bigger upsets of recent NA times, I guess you could say, with eLevate beating CLG 2-1 in the series. I mean, CLG was having so much success at the time in online play, as well as getting, like, you know, that map win against LDLCR, what is now Envious, on Dust 2 at Aspen X Games the weekend right before this event, only to lose to eLevate on that map 16-9 at this particular event. So it's definitely kind of an upset, and while Elige was certainly not their best player in this series, he did play fairly well. I guess Roko was kind of the highlight player of this particular series, but Elige definitely doing his job and played really well. Then they went on to play Cloud9, and of course they lost that series 0-2, but still some, you know, decent play out of a player like Elige for his first LAN event against some of the top North American competition. So basically, from looking at what he's done thus far, I think this is a kid that has some potential that could be developed into a good player and be kind of a new guy to rise to fill this void we've been talking about on the talent that has left the North American scene and people trying to step up and fill that. I think Elige is definitely a player who can do that, and I definitely think that this is an upgrade for Liquid as a roster. He is going to be replacing Nav, who is a player that for me was always kind of hit or miss. He was also a very young guy, but from what I understand from talking to some people, he didn't necessarily have that level of dedication or that attitude that people really liked. There were instances where he would just mentally check out of games whenever his team was behind or he wasn't fragging well. He would just kind of be out of it, and then he'd be pretty much useless for the rest of the game. So definitely maybe some attitude issues there from what I understand from some people that I've talked to. And also, like I said, he just kind of hit or miss as a fragger to me. In fact, statistically speaking, for most of Liquid's online play, he's been either their worst fragger or just above Daps on the fragging department, who's their in-game leader, who you don't really expect to be a major fragger on the team. So definitely that was probably one of the weaker players on the team to be replaced if they wanted to make a roster move. So it definitely makes sense. So if there was some attitude issues with NAF and some dedication issues with NAF, and also his fragging wasn't really consistent, it makes sense to get somebody like Elige, who's another young and upcoming guy that they can mold and that has some talent. And we'll just have to see where it goes. I think, you know, watching some of the Alienware Arena Area 51 tournament that we saw recently in NA, and then looking at some of their Face-It matches that they've played recently, while Elige hasn't played really, really well yet, he's had a couple of matches where he was really good, but like overall, I guess it hasn't been that astounding just yet. I think that it'll just take some time for him to mesh into the team, but I really think that the combination of Nitro and Elige opening up bomb sites can definitely be, you know, a pretty strong, you know, duo, so to speak, on working entries and getting bomb sites and working together with the Dren's op and such. And I think, you know, Fugly being able to now play a more comfortable support role, and another young and upcoming guy, is definitely going to help this team out going forward. Now, I will say, I did a whole video on Liquid and some of their issues and problems I felt that they had coming out of that Katowice qualifier we saw them playing, where they didn't qualify for the main event. And I did a whole video about some of the issues I thought I had with leadership and not being on the same page and basically having a useless coach and some of these other different things I talked about. Just definitely check that out if you want to hear more of my analysis on Liquid as a whole, because for me, none of that has really changed quite yet until I see how they play with the Elige and I see what they're doing, because the bottom line is they didn't qualify for CEVO LAN. They dropped out, true, but I don't think they would have qualified anyway. Their record wasn't that great. They didn't qualify for ESEA LAN either. Now, they're currently the favorite right now to probably advance out of the Face-It League to make it to the main event there. So they still have that going for them right now. But they definitely had some shortcomings, and I think a lot of the issues I talked about in that Part 4 video still exist, though hopefully maybe some of the communication and attitude issues that I've discussed there will definitely improve. I know that Dren is kind of helping with calling a bit more now from what I understand. It seems like Daps is learning as he goes, so hopefully this team can develop, and hopefully Elige can be a good player for them to do so. I think it is an upgrade there. But what I will say is one of the concerns I still definitely have is the fact that there's so much youth on this team. The only player with really any kind of experience on the team at a professional level of Counter-Strike is going to be a Dren, with his days playing with, you know, Dynamic and Curse and iBuyPower, and then of course the pedigree he had from Counter-Strike Source. I mean, he's really the only guy that has any, you know, experience on this team, and he's not even the one leading it. causes for some concern. I definitely think there's still some inexperience issues here. They have a lot of young talent between Nitro, Fugly, and now Elige, but that's just it. It's a lot of young, inexperienced talent. So I don't know how long it'll take for these guys to develop, or if they will develop well or not. We'll just have to see. I know Nitro's already kind of established himself pretty well with his time playing with iBuyPower at the ESCA LAN last season and playing at that DreamHack Winter 14. So if he can continue to show that promise, and I thought Fugly played pretty well at the Katowice qualifiers and throughout most of their online play. So we'll just have to see how it goes. Basically, it's kind of hard to tell, but I think that they've picked up a good player. Now, of course, the reaction to this is that eLevate is going to pick up Desi as a replacement. Now, once again, in part 5 of my State of North American CSGO, I talked about Desi as a player for a good 5 or 6 minutes, so I don't want to just rehash that all over again. Point is I've always felt that Desi was a guy who's played very well in the NA scene when he's played with teams like Manajumas, where I thought he was actually performing better than Shroud at times, but Shroud got the chance at Cloud9 and he just kind of was left with really nothing right at that point. We know he did have his chance with iBuyPower at DreamHack Winter 14. That didn't work out for whatever reason. He was removed and a Drink came in as a replacement before they tried to form that whole NA Dream team. We've also seen him play with like a Pug at ClutchCon, where he played very, very well as a fragger when he was playing alongside guys like, I think it was Summit, Frost, Mo, and I can't remember who their 5th was at that particular event. But either way, a Skadoodle. Either way, he fragged really well at that event. I know it was a Pug, but he was fragging really well against Liquid and some of these other teams they played in group play and best of 3s. Even though they didn't, get a good finish, I still thought he played well. And I thought he's always played very well online. And even at some of the LANs I've seen him play at, he's looked just as good. So I think that for eLevate, losing a guy like Elige, who was like an aggro entry fragger and a really good fragger, one of your statistically best players, picking up Desi, I think fills Elige's shoes pretty well as far as a role perspective. Being an aggressive entry fragger guy, Desi's going to be able to do that. He's going to be able to usually put up pretty good numbers, just like Elige was able to do. So I think that they have a good replacement coming in for Elige as far as fragging ability for sure, and being able to have that impact in their matches. I will say that there's maybe 2 potential issues with Desi, and I've talked about one of these in that part 5 video I did. One of which is I've heard rumblings about maybe attitude issues with him. Once again, I talked a bit about how sometimes he can come off as a bit arrogant or a bit full of himself. He does think of himself very highly as being one of the best players in the NA scene. There's not necessarily anything wrong with having that confidence of thinking that you're one of the best, but maybe sometimes you cross the line, you're a bit too full of yourself, especially when you don't necessarily have the accolades or accomplishments to back you up quite yet, because you've just maybe displayed some good play at a couple of LAN events and some online play. But until you actually really capitalize on something, like, so for instance, maybe if he plays really well at the CEVO LAN and they win the event or something like that and he's their best player or the MVP, that would be like one of his first really big accomplishments, to be honest, in the North American scene. I know that he did do really well with eLevate when they won that Alienware Arena tournament in that 2-1 Grand Final Series against Liquid, so that was, a good first kind of play for him while playing with eLevate, so that's kind of promising. But I do know that I have heard some rumblings about issues with maybe some arrogance or something like that. I've also heard issues where sometimes he can maybe rage a bit too much in game and go quiet because he's upset or something like that. So I don't know how much of a problem that is. I guess I just know that he's had a hard time finding a team before he got on this eLevate squad after he had that trial with iBuyPower. I know he tried out with what is now Luminosity for a bit before this whole eLevate thing. I think that maybe when Liquid was shopping around for a player after they were, deciding to drop NAF to a backup position, maybe Desi's name came up in the running when they were trying out players. I think he actually played with Liquid in a Face-It match or something, or on some type of online match, right before they picked up Elige and right before he joined eLevate. So maybe he was, a candidate. I'm not really sure. Either way, some of those issues could come up. I will also say another issue I see with Desi to a degree when I watch them play games is that sometimes he can be, it's great that he embraces this role of being aggressive and being an entry fragger, kind of like I was talking about with Elige. But when I watch him play sometimes, I do sometimes see him try to be a bit too aggressive, a bit by himself, like without any support. Like he tries to be the hero, or he tries to make a big play or open up the round by himself with a really big frag or an aggressive push. For example, I was watching a Dust 2 game recently where, all 5 players on both teams are still alive, and he, like, it's a T-side Dust 2, and he kind of just randomly presses 2 double doors to try to get the pick on the guy CT spawn or the guy outside B, and he doesn't really have any support to back him up to trade when he goes to make that play. Sometimes that play worked out, sometimes it didn't, and if it didn't, then he puts his team at a 4 versus 5 right off the bat. So there are these instances, that's just one example, but in general I have seen instances where he may get a bit too aggressive, a bit too individualistic in his play, trying to be a hero type deal, and that could cause some issue. It may work against North Americans when he's able just to outskill and outshoot his opponent because he's a better aimer, but when he's going to potentially play against, European teams, or when he's playing against the cream of the crop of NA against some other really good aimers, that may not quite work out, and he may have to kind of tone that particular play down just a bit. We'll just have to see. Also, just really quick, Hiko is going to be filling in for eLevate at CEVO LAN in place of Storm, and I think that this definitely kind of bolsters at least the skill that is going to be on eLevate at that event. And don't get me wrong, Storm's a good player for them. He plays that lurker support type position, and that's also the role that Hiko's pretty much played his entire career. So basically it'll be a very easy transition for him to go from being a free agent for, I guess, the last few months, except for some online play he's filled in for different teams over the past few months. But this will be his first LAN event with a full pro team against other pro teams. I think he said in 4 months or something like that. So he's been just kind of sitting there idling for a long time. And I know this is just a one-time thing. I don't think he's planning on joining this team full-time after this event. But I think that it's going to be an easy transition for eLevate to not be able to use their normal lurker and then grabbing another amazing lurker in Hiko, who has a lot of accomplishments under his belt. Arguably the best player in NA throughout pretty much all of 2013 and the beginning of 2014. One of the most consistent players, kind of that rock player, always good for a good amount of frags. Also usually pretty good for some clutch plays. So I think that adding Hiko to the lineup for this particular event, I think it helps out eLevate. And honestly, I don't think they'll have too hard of a time getting Hiko to fit into the team for this particular event. So yeah, in fact, I would think eLevate might even be, it might be arguable that eLevate might even be maybe a slight favorite for that event. I know CLG is probably most people's favorite for that event, given who is going to be attending, but I think eLevate puts up a good challenge. I mean, hell, even before they picked up Hiko and Desi, this eLevate CLG rivalry has been really intense. A lot of their maps are very, very close. They go into overtime on many occasions, especially on Dust 2. You have eLevate winning the ClutchCon series against CLG, but then CLG beating them in the NA Katowice qualifiers to get to the European qualifier, like the LAN event. So it's like an NA qualifier, then the pre-qualifier, then the main event. So it's like 3 levels that CLG had to go through to get to the main event, basically, or 2 different qualifiers to go through. And in the NA regional one, they beat eLevate in a 2-1 series there, so there's some kind of revenge there, but we've seen them also trade maps against each other in online play and some of these online tournaments outside of that, so they're already kind of close, and they're already just have a big rivalry, and they're just kind of back and forth. So this little roster tweak taking place here with Hiko coming in and adding a lot of skill and experience to that team for this event, and then Desi coming in, another really heavy fragger that'll be a good replacement for Elige, at least from a fragging perspective and an aiming perspective. You might argue that eLevate might be a slight favorite this time around against CLG, especially with some of the issues we saw with CLG at the Katowice main event, which I did a whole video on as well. That's actually the most recent video I did before this one. Or no, I guess I did Cloud9 most recently, and before that it was CLG. So the last 2 parts I talked about, those 2 big teams. Other than that, I think that's about it. Thanks for tuning in. I will say that if you have any suggestions on things you'd like to hear me talk about, definitely feel free to provide those suggestions on either the Reddit thread that this video is on, or on Twitter, or on the YouTube comments, or just whatever. I have some ideas of more things I want to talk about, such as the most recent update to CSGO and the mentality of Valve's patches. I wanted to talk maybe a bit about oversaturation in the NACSGO team with some of the, now that we have so many leagues and online tournaments, and some of the issues that we've seen recently, like when teams were having to forfeit some matches in ESEA and different things like that. Pretty recently, I maybe wanted to talk about that concept or that problem a bit in one video. So that's like 2 videos I kind of have planned out so far. I'm also probably going to do some type of, pre-CEVO LAN video, as well as maybe a post-CEVO LAN video. Same with ESCA LAN, maybe a pre-event and post-event video on that event as well. So I have, like, I guess 5 or so, videos planned that I already want to do over the next few weeks. But, eventually maybe news items slow down. If there's a particular topic you'd like to hear more about because you want some more insight on it and you haven't heard anything about it yet, feel free to, pass on suggestions. Other than that, if you enjoyed yourself, just follow and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.